"I'm claiming you tonight," the giant rancher growled to the lonely black widow. But what he was really claiming was her right to justice and truth in a town built on lies. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of Dust Haven's finest citizens. Oil lamps cast dancing shadows across weathered faces in the community hall. Gwendolyn Hawthorne clutched her worn shawl tighter as whispers followed her entrance. 6 months had passed since Marcus died in that mining accident. 6 months of struggling to make ends meet with her seamstress work. 6 months of noticing things others ignored. She raised her hand during the town meeting. Ezekiel Comstock looked up from his papers with practiced patience. His expensive suit and polished boots marked him as the most successful man in town. Gwen stood slowly. Her voice carried across the silent room. She spoke of irregularities in land deed transfers, missing signatures, dates that made no sense, properties changing hands overnight. Comstock smiled like a father addressing a confused child. He adjusted his spectacles and cleared his throat. The townspeople leaned forward. Grief could make a person see shadows where none existed. Perhaps she should focus on finding a new husband instead of troubling herself with business matters beyond her understanding. Nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. Gwen felt heat rise in her cheeks. She sat down hard on the bench. Her hands trembled, but her eyes remained sharp. She memorized every face that had laughed, every person who had looked away. Outside the hall, she noticed the giant rancher defending an elderly Mexican farmer from harassment. Silas Hartman stood nearly 7 feet tall. His massive hands gestured with surprising gentleness. The troublemakers scattered when he approached. Most folks feared Silas. They assumed his size meant a simple mind. Gwen had watched him at previous meetings. He listened more than he spoke. His questions showed careful thought. The weeks that followed brought new hardships. Her seamstress clients canceled orders without explanation. Mrs. Peterson claimed she no longer needed alterations. The banker's wife suddenly preferred store-bought dresses. The bank raised her rent with 1 day's notice. The clerk avoided her eyes when she protested. He stamped the papers without looking up. Whispers followed her through town. Accusations of spreading malicious gossip about upstanding citizens. People crossed the street to avoid her. Former friends turned their backs in the general store. Gwen understood the pattern forming around her. She had seen it happen to the Rodriguez family before they lost their farm, to the widow Thompson before she disappeared one night, to others who had asked too many questions. Her small property represented everything Marcus had left behind. The deed sat in her wooden box next to his wedding ring. Soon even that security would vanish. The railroad was coming to Dust Haven. Everyone knew it. Land values would skyrocket overnight. Someone was positioning themselves to profit from that knowledge. Gwen continued watching, continued remembering. Her mind cataloged every suspicious transaction and convenient coincidence. The town saw a lonely black widow losing her grip on reality. She saw a carefully orchestrated plan destroying families one by one. The harassment escalated within days. Comstock's associates cornered Gwen outside the general store. 3 men in clean shirts and polished boots surrounded her like wolves circling prey. The banker's son stepped forward first. His voice carried the authority of inherited wealth. He suggested she stop spreading lies about respected businessmen. The town had no patience for troublemakers. A small crowd gathered to watch. Former neighbors stood with arms crossed. Their faces showed no sympathy for the woman they once greeted with smiles. Gwen clutched her market basket tighter. She asked a simple question about the legitimacy of recent property transfers. Her voice remained steady despite the trembling in her hands. The men exchanged glances. Their expressions hardened. One mentioned that grief could drive people to desperate acts. Another suggested she might need medical attention for her obvious delusions. The crowd murmured agreement. Several nodded knowingly. The crazy widow was at it again. A shadow fell across the group. Silas Hartman stepped into the circle with measured steps. His enormous frame blocked out the afternoon sun. The confrontation shifted instantly. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. The lady had asked a reasonable question about land deeds. Someone should provide a reasonable answer. The banker's son took an involuntary step backward. The other men found sudden interest in their boots. The crowd began dispersing without another word. Silas waited until the street cleared. He touched the brim of his hat to Gwen. She nodded her thanks and hurried home with burning cheeks. That evening brought an unexpected visitor. Silas stood on her small porch holding his hat in massive hands. He asked permission to speak privately about mutual concerns. Gwen invited him inside her modest cabin. The furniture looked miniature around his enormous frame. He sat carefully on a wooden chair that creaked under his weight. She poured coffee from her dented pot. Her hands had stopped shaking. Something about his presence felt protective rather than threatening. Silas spoke quietly about his own suspicions. Smaller ranchers were losing land through mysterious legal complications. Properties vanished into shell companies with untraceable ownership. The pattern troubled him deeply. Gwen's eyes widened. She had documented similar irregularities affecting families in town. Her observations matched his concerns perfectly. He revealed an unexpected truth. His mother had been a schoolteacher before the war. She had taught him to read and write with exceptional skill. Most people assumed his size meant stupidity. The misconception served him well during business negotiations. Gwen shared her own secret. Marcus had worked as a frontier lawyer's assistant. He had taught her to analyze legal documents and recognize fraud patterns. She possessed detailed knowledge of territorial property laws. They formed an unlikely partnership that night. Her analytical mind combined with his access and protection. Together, they could investigate what neither could accomplish alone. The campaign against Gwen intensified over the following weeks. Comstock spread whispers about her dangerous mental state. He expressed concern for community safety with practiced sincerity. A petition appeared requesting her removal from town for her own good. Signatures accumulated rapidly. Even families she had helped with sewing began avoiding her completely. Pressure mounted on Silas as well. Business associates questioned his judgment. Suppliers threatened to cancel contracts if he continued supporting the unstable widow. His reputation suffered by association. The investigation continued despite the hostility. Late evening meetings in Silas's ranch house revealed disturbing patterns. Gwen's perfect memory combined with his document collection painted a clear picture of systematic fraud. She could recall exact conversations from months earlier. Dates and names flowed from her mind with photographic precision. Marcus had always marveled at her ability to remember every detail of complex legal discussions. Silas provided access to records she could never obtain alone. His intimidating presence opened doors and loosened tongues. People spoke freely around him, assuming he lacked the intelligence to understand their implications. They discovered the corruption ran deeper than expected. The bank president signed suspicious foreclosure orders. The county clerk backdated crucial documents. Even the local judge approved questionable property transfers without proper review. The pieces formed a comprehensive conspiracy. Someone with significant resources was orchestrating the systematic acquisition of valuable land. The railroad's arrival would make these properties worth fortunes. Gwen's husband had discovered part of this scheme before his death. His questions had made someone nervous. The mining accident looked increasingly suspicious under closer examination. Evidence accumulated in Silas's secure ranch safe. Financial records, forged signatures, testimonies from displaced families. The case against the conspirators grew stronger each day. Comstock announced a final town meeting to address the ongoing disruption. He planned to present evidence of Gwen's unstable mental condition. The community would vote on her immediate removal from Dust Haven for everyone's safety. The trap was closing around her. Years of careful planning threatened to crumble under manufactured public hysteria. Her last chance lay in the evidence they had gathered and the courage to present it. Silas faced his own decision. Supporting her could destroy his business and social standing. Abandoning her would preserve his comfortable life while condemning an innocent woman. The night before the meeting, they reviewed their strategy one final time. Everything depended on perfect timing and the community's willingness to hear uncomfortable truths. Gwen folded the last document into their evidence collection. Her hands remained steady now. She had found her strength through purpose and partnership. The final confrontation approached like a summer storm. Tomorrow would determine whether justice or corruption controlled Dust Haven's future. The community hall overflowed with residents on the night that would determine Gwen's fate. Every bench was packed. Standing room filled quickly. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation and manufactured outrage. Comstock had orchestrated the gathering with masterful precision. He wore his finest suit and carried a leather portfolio that suggested official importance. His supporters occupied the front rows like a jury already convinced of guilt. Gwen entered through the back door to avoid the hostile stares. Whispers followed her movement down the center aisle. Former friends turned their faces away. Children pointed until their mothers pulled their hands down. She took her usual seat in the back corner. Her worn dress and patched shawl marked her as different from the respectable families surrounding her. The isolation felt complete and suffocating. Comstock called the meeting to order with theatrical authority. He spoke of community safety and difficult decisions. Sometimes good people made choices that protected everyone from unfortunate situations. He opened his portfolio with practiced ceremony. The first document appeared to be an official medical evaluation. His voice carried false regret as he explained the necessity of professional intervention. The report detailed erratic behavior and dangerous delusions, paranoid accusations against respected citizens, threats to community stability. The recommendation was immediate removal for her own welfare and public safety. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Several women nodded knowingly. The banker's wife mentioned her own uncomfortable encounters with the disturbed widow. Comstock's voice grew stronger with each fabricated detail. He painted Gwen as a woman consumed by grief and conspiracy theories. Her inability to accept reality posed risks to herself and others. The fake psychiatrist's signature looked official enough to convince worried parents. The letterhead bore the seal of the Territorial Medical Board. Few would question such apparent authority. Gwen felt the walls closing around her. Every face in the room showed conviction of her guilt. Even families she had helped with sewing and mending now viewed her as a threat. Her hands trembled in her lap. Doubt crept into her mind for the first time. Perhaps she had imagined patterns where none existed. Maybe grief had twisted her perceptions beyond recognition. The vote proceeded with grim efficiency. Hands rose throughout the hall supporting her immediate banishment. The count was overwhelming and decisive. Only a handful of abstentions broke the unanimous condemnation. Comstock's final declaration rang with false compassion. He was claiming her tonight as a danger to this community. The decision was final and would be enforced immediately. Gwen closed her eyes and prepared for exile. Everything Marcus had built would vanish. Her security, her home, her identity would disappear with the morning stagecoach. A chair scraped loudly against the wooden floor. Heavy footsteps echoed through the sudden silence. Silas Hartman rose to his full, imposing height with a leather satchel in his massive hands. His voice cut through the tension like thunder rolling across the plains. Before they made any permanent decisions, folks might want to see what Mrs. Hawthorne and he had discovered together. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Comstock's confident expression flickered with the first hint of concern. He suggested that emotional appeals would not change medical facts or community safety requirements. Silas ignored the interruption. He opened the satchel and removed a thick stack of documents. His mother had taught him that knowledge was more powerful than size or strength. The revelation began with a simple truth. Gwen possessed an extraordinary memory that captured every detail of conversations and transactions. Her analytical abilities surpassed those of trained legal professionals. A flashback unfolded through Silas's steady narration. Marcus Hawthorne had recognized his wife's exceptional gifts early in their marriage. He taught her to read complex legal documents and identify fraud patterns with scientific precision. Knowledge was the one thing they could never take from her. Those had been Marcus's final words of instruction. Remember everything. Trust your mind above all other voices. Gwen had followed that advice religiously. For 2 years she had documented every suspicious transaction in Dust Haven. Her perfect recall created an unbreakable chain of evidence. Silas revealed his own hidden talents. His intimidating presence opened doors that remained closed to others. People spoke freely around him, assuming his size indicated limited intelligence. His schoolteacher mother had drilled him in reading and writing until his skills exceeded those of most college graduates. The combination of literacy and physical presence made him a formidable investigator. Together they had built a comprehensive case against the real criminals destroying Dust Haven. The evidence would shock the community and expose years of systematic fraud. Comstock attempted to regain control of the meeting. He dismissed their claims as desperate fabrications from a disturbed woman and her misguided supporter. The medical evaluation remained valid regardless of emotional appeals. Silas pulled out the first document with deliberate ceremony. The room fell silent as he began reading financial records that revealed impossible coincidences and convenient timing. Property transfers occurred within days of tragic accidents. Foreclosure notices arrived immediately after mysterious business failures. The pattern was too precise to be accidental. Gwen stood slowly and walked to the front of the hall. Her voice carried new authority as she began reciting dates, names, and amounts from perfect memory. The community realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. This was not the rambling of a disturbed mind, but the methodical presentation of documented facts. The tide began turning as evidence mounted against everything they had believed about their respected leaders and their dismissed neighbor. Gwen's voice grew stronger with each piece of evidence presented. She recited the Rodriguez family's foreclosure with photographic precision. The property transfer occurred exactly 3 days after their eldest son died in a suspicious accident at the mill. The banker had visited their farm within hours of the funeral. His sympathy came with immediate demands for overdue payments that had never been mentioned before. The family lost everything within a week. She moved to the Thompson case without consulting notes. The widow's property vanished through a backdated contract that violated territorial homestead laws. The document bore signatures from dates when key witnesses were traveling in other counties. Gasps echoed through the hall as families recognized similar patterns in their own losses. The Martinez Ranch, the Johnson homestead, the O'Brien farm that disappeared overnight through legal technicalities. Silas stepped forward with a manila folder containing bank records. His investigation had revealed shell companies with mysterious funding sources, properties transferred through corporations that existed only on paper. He had used his imposing presence to access files that others could never see. Bank clerks spoke freely around him, assuming he lacked the intelligence to understand financial complexities. Their careless words provided crucial evidence. His mother's teachings echoed in his methodical presentation. A smart man was more dangerous than a strong one. A man who was both became unstoppable when fighting for justice. The crowd shifted restlessly as familiar names appeared in the evidence. Bank President Morrison had signed foreclosure orders on properties that were never actually behind on payments. His signature appeared on dozens of suspicious transactions. County Clerk Williams had backdated contracts and altered property records. His careful handwriting marked documents that violated established territorial laws. The alterations followed a clear pattern of deception. Judge Hamilton had approved questionable property transfers without proper legal review. His rubber stamp appeared on cases that should have required weeks of careful consideration. The speed suggested predetermined outcomes. Comstock's confident expression cracked as the evidence mounted against his network. He attempted interruptions, but the crowd demanded to hear everything. His practiced charm could not deflect documented proof of systematic fraud. Gwen revealed the most shocking discovery with surgical precision. The conspiracy involved not just local officials, but reached into powerful railroad interests planning massive land acquisitions. The railroad consortium had planted Comstock in Dust Haven years before construction began. His mission was to acquire valuable properties at fraction of their future worth. The scheme depended on maintaining his reputation while destroying potential opposition. Her husband Marcus had stumbled upon part of this plan during his work with legal documents. His questions about unusual property transfers had attracted dangerous attention. The mining accident was no accident at all. The revelation struck the community like lightning. Marcus Hawthorne had been murdered to protect a conspiracy worth millions of dollars. His widow's supposed paranoia was actually accurate perception of mortal danger. Evidence of the murder came through Marcus's own hidden notes. He had documented threats and suspicious meetings in the weeks before his death. The mining equipment had been sabotaged to create a believable accident. Silas presented testimony from the mine foreman who had been paid to remain silent. The man's conscience finally broke when he learned about the broader conspiracy. His detailed confession implicated Comstock directly in the murder plot. The community erupted as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. Respected leaders had systematically stolen from their neighbors while maintaining facades of respectability. Trust built over years crumbled in minutes. Mrs. Peterson stood with tears streaming down her face. She apologized to Gwen for canceling her sewing orders. The pressure had come from her husband's business relationship with the bank. Fear had made her complicit in the isolation campaign. Other families followed with similar confessions. The baker's wife had been threatened with foreclosure unless she stopped purchasing Gwen's services. The general store owner faced supply disruptions if he continued treating her with respect. The network of coercion extended throughout the community. Economic pressure had turned neighbors against each other while protecting the real criminals. Divide and conquer had been their primary strategy. Silas revealed the final piece of evidence with dramatic timing. The railroad consortium had planned to offer pennies on the dollar for land they already controlled through shell companies. The profits would have been staggering. Corporate executives in distant cities had assumed that a remote frontier town would never organize effective resistance. They underestimated the power of one woman's perfect memory and relentless pursuit of truth. The documents showed correspondence between Comstock and his eastern handlers, orders to accelerate property acquisitions, instructions to eliminate any threats to the operation, authorization for whatever methods proved necessary. Gwen's transformation before the community's eyes was remarkable. The dismissed widow had become a formidable prosecutor presenting an airtight case. Her intelligence and determination had exposed corruption that reached far beyond their small town. The crowd's hostility shifted completely toward Comstock and his collaborators. Former supporters distanced themselves from the conspiracy. The banker's son quietly slipped out the back door. Silas announced that territorial authorities were already en route to Dust Haven. His connections with other ranchers had alerted law enforcement to the broader scheme. Justice would finally be served. Comstock made one desperate attempt to salvage his position. He claimed the evidence was fabricated by a disturbed woman and her misguided protector. The community had trusted him for years and should continue doing so. His words fell on deaf ears. The evidence was too overwhelming and the pattern too clear. Years of careful manipulation could not survive the light of documented truth. The vote was called again with completely different results. Gwen received a standing ovation from people who had voted for her exile minutes earlier. The details of Marcus's murder emerged with devastating clarity. Gwen's voice remained steady as she revealed her husband's final investigation. He had discovered payments flowing from Eastern Railroad interests into local bank accounts. Marcus had documented secret meetings between Comstock and mysterious visitors from back east. His notes described plans to acquire the entire valley before railroad construction began. The profits would exceed anything the region had ever seen. The mining accident had been meticulously planned. Equipment sabotage created the appearance of industrial mishap. The foreman received enough money to relocate his family and buy silence. Marcus died because he asked the right questions. Gwen had suspected the truth from the beginning. Her husband's caution around certain people in his final weeks, his hidden notes tucked inside their family Bible, his whispered warnings about trusting appearances over actions. The community absorbed the revelation with growing horror. They had dismissed her grief-driven suspicions, while her husband's killer walked among them as a respected leader. The betrayal cut deeper than financial fraud. Silas presented the foreman's signed confession with grim satisfaction. The man had fled to California, but guilt eventually brought him back. His detailed testimony included dates, payments, and Comstock's specific instructions for the sabotage. The murder weapon had been a strategically weakened support beam in the mine shaft. Marcus died instantly when the ceiling collapsed during his routine inspection. The investigation was perfunctory because accidents were common in dangerous mining operations. Evidence showed Comstock personally supervising the cover-up. He had comforted Gwen at the funeral while knowing he had ordered her husband's death. The performance required a level of coldness that shocked even his former supporters. The railroad conspiracy reached far beyond Dust Haven into a network of similar schemes across the frontier. Corporate executives had identified dozens of communities along planned routes. Local agents like Comstock were systematically acquiring valuable properties through fraud and intimidation. Letters between Comstock and his handlers revealed the scope of the operation. Millions of acres were being stolen through legal manipulation and selective violence. Dust Haven represented just one small piece in a massive puzzle of corruption. The Eastern executives had chosen their local agents carefully. Comstock possessed the charm and intelligence necessary to gain community trust. His willingness to commit murder when threatened made him particularly valuable to the conspiracy. Gwen revealed the most disturbing aspect of the scheme with clinical precision. The railroad consortium never intended to honor their promises of prosperity and progress. Once they controlled the land, they would extract maximum profit while leaving communities impoverished. The planned route would bypass Dust Haven entirely after property acquisition was complete. The railroad would serve mining and timber interests controlled by the same Eastern corporations. Local residents would lose their land and receive no economic benefits. Silas had discovered similar patterns in neighboring counties through his rancher connections. Entire communities had been stripped of property and left destitute. The railroad brought wealth only to those who orchestrated the conspiracy from distant boardrooms. The investigation had revealed a sophisticated operation spanning multiple territories. Local banks, judges, and clerks were recruited or coerced into participation. Those who refused to cooperate faced economic ruin or worse. Comstock's role as coordinator made him indispensable until the land acquisitions were complete. His handlers had promised him ownership of vast tracts plus a percentage of future profits. His greed had overcome any remaining conscience. The fake psychiatric evaluation represented his final desperate attempt to eliminate the last threat to the operation. Eastern executives had authorized extreme measures to protect their investment. Gwen's exile or institutionalization would have completed their plan. Her perfect memory had preserved details that would have been lost or forgotten by others. Names, dates, and amounts that seemed insignificant individually became devastating evidence when assembled systematically. Her analytical abilities had reconstructed the entire conspiracy. The community realized how close they had come to total devastation. Without Gwen's persistence and Silas's protection, the scheme would have succeeded completely. Their neighbors would have lost everything while enriching distant criminals. Territorial marshals arrived in Dust Haven, as Silas had promised. His connections with other ranchers had alerted authorities to the broader conspiracy. The evidence presented at the town meeting provided everything needed for prosecution. Comstock's arrest proceeded without resistance. His arrogance crumbled when faced with overwhelming proof of his crimes. The man who had commanded respect and fear became a broken figure shuffling toward justice. His final plea to the community fell on deaf ears. He claimed they didn't understand the complexities of business and progress. The railroad would bring prosperity that justified any temporary hardships. His words sounded hollow after the revelations. Bank President Morrison and County Clerk Williams faced similar arrests. Their participation in the conspiracy was fully documented through the evidence Gwen and Silas had assembled. Judge Hamilton would face territorial court proceedings for corruption. The shell companies were dissolved, and fraudulent property transfers were reversed. Families who had lost their land through legal manipulation would recover their rightful ownership. The victims would receive justice after years of suffering. Eastern Railroad executives found themselves under federal investigation for conspiracy and fraud. Their carefully constructed network of local agents collapsed as evidence spread to other territories. The scope of their crimes ensured serious consequences. Gwen's vindication was complete but bittersweet. Her husband's murder had been avenged and the conspiracy exposed. However, Marcus would never return to share in her triumph over the forces that had destroyed their happiness. The community's transformation from hostility to respect marked a fundamental shift in how they viewed justice and truth. The town of Dust Haven transformed in the weeks following Comstock's arrest. What had been a community divided by suspicion and fear became united in purpose and mutual support. The conspiracy's exposure created bonds stronger than those that existed before the corruption took root. Gwen received a formal apology from the town council at their next meeting. The same hall where she had faced exile became the site of her vindication. Every seat was filled with neighbors who now understood the courage she had shown. The council offered her the position of official legal advocate for Dust Haven. Her exceptional memory and analytical skills would protect the community from future fraud. Her salary would be funded through recovered assets from the conspiracy. She accepted the role with quiet dignity. The woman who had been dismissed as the lonely black widow would now serve as the town's primary defense against corruption. Her transformation was complete, but had come at tremendous personal cost. Silas stood beside her during the ceremony. Their partnership had evolved beyond mutual respect into something deeper and more lasting. Two people who had been misunderstood by their community found perfect understanding in each other. Their business partnership formalized over the following months. Gwen's legal expertise combined with Silas's resources and connections created a formidable team. They helped other communities recognize and resist similar schemes throughout the territory. The romance between them developed naturally from shared values and complementary strengths. She provided the intellectual foundation for their work, while he offered protection and practical support. Their relationship challenged traditional expectations about partnerships between men and women. Property restoration proceeded smoothly under Gwen's supervision. Families who had lost their land through fraudulent foreclosures regained rightful ownership. The legal processes that had once worked against them now served justice instead of corruption. The Rodriguez family returned to their farm with tears of gratitude. Mrs. Thompson recovered her homestead and the security it represented. Dozens of other families found their faith in justice restored through careful legal work. Compensation flowed to victims through the seized assets of the conspiracy. Bank accounts frozen by territorial authorities provided funds for those who had suffered economic hardship. The criminals' wealth was redistributed to their victims. Gwen established her office in a building adjacent to Silas's ranch headquarters. The arrangement allowed them to coordinate their activities while maintaining professional boundaries. Her legal practice grew as word spread about her exceptional abilities. Other communities sought their help after learning about Dust Haven's successful resistance. Similar conspiracies were uncovered and dismantled across multiple territories. Their work expanded far beyond their original home. The federal investigation into the railroad conspiracy produced convictions and prison sentences. Eastern executives who had orchestrated the scheme faced serious consequences for their crimes. Their network of corruption was systematically destroyed. Comstock himself received a lengthy prison sentence for murder and fraud. His trial became a landmark case, demonstrating that justice could reach even the most sophisticated criminals. His fall from respectability to conviction was complete. The legitimate railroad eventually arrived in Dust Haven to negotiate fair land purchases. Representatives found a community prepared to defend its interests through legal expertise rather than naive trust. Gwen reviewed every contract with meticulous attention. Property values increased as originally predicted, but the benefits flowed to rightful owners rather than criminal conspirators. Families who had nearly lost everything found themselves with valuable assets and bright futures. The railroad brought genuine prosperity to Dust Haven without the exploitation originally planned. Jobs and economic growth enriched the community while respecting property rights. Progress occurred through cooperation rather than corruption. Gwen's reputation spread throughout the territory as news of her extraordinary abilities reached other towns. Legal professionals sought her consultation on complex cases. Her perfect memory became legendary among those who valued justice. 6 months after the conspiracy's exposure, Dust Haven had become a model community. Neighboring towns sent delegations to learn about their systems for preventing fraud and protecting vulnerable residents. Their success inspired broader reforms. The anniversary of Marcus's death brought both sorrow and celebration. Gwen visited his grave with flowers and the satisfaction of knowing his sacrifice had not been in vain. Justice had been served and his memory honored. Silas accompanied her to the cemetery with quiet understanding. He had never tried to replace Marcus in her heart, but had created his own space through patience and respect. Their love was built on shared purpose rather than desperate need. The community gathered that evening to commemorate their collective triumph over corruption. What had begun as a conspiracy to destroy them had ultimately made them stronger and more united. They had learned to value truth over comfort and justice over convenience. Gwen stood before her neighbors with confidence earned through struggle and vindication. The woman who had once been dismissed as paranoid and unstable was now recognized as their most valuable protector. Her intelligence and persistence had saved them all. The future stretched ahead with promise rather than threat. Dust Haven would continue growing and prospering under the protection of laws fairly applied. Corruption would find no fertile ground in a community that valued vigilance and truth. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.